Perfect. Okay, so we've got some people coming in already.
Oh, great.
We're just going to wait a little while, give people until probably a couple minutes after 2,
Yeah.
in case people are having technical issues getting into the webinar.
Yeah, that sounds perfect to me.
This is good. Getting a lot of folks coming in already, so that's a good sign. Just so you know, we ended up with 60 approved registrants. So
Great.
we should be hitting some good numbers today. Getting the word out, so that's good. Are you starting to feel like a floating head yet?
Always the way with webinars. I know I'll talk about this during the presentation too, but we're used to this as scholarships and fellowship staff here because all of our meetings to discuss applications are held virtually. So I've become accustomed over the years to being the floating head.
Yeah. Yeah, we do all of our executive meetings online for CAPS as well.
Yeah.
And every meeting I do virtually, it's almost very rarely now do people want to chat on the phone. So I'm accustomed as well to being floating.
It is nicer. It's not, it's hard to beat the physical in person, but I definitely prefer being able to see who I'm talking to or who's talking versus just telephone conversation.
Yeah, well, especially now I find we're trying to share slides or, you know, there's something you want to show somebody and it's just so easy nowadays.
Yeah.
Okay, we're almost there. It's 2 o'clock. We're gonna wait a couple more minutes.
Yeah.
So we'll go at 2:02.
Sounds great.
And I will write a message just in case somebody comes in and is like, "Oh, what's going on? I can't hear anything." I'll mute myself later so you don't get to listen to the clickety-clack during the webinar.
No worries.
While we're waiting, I'll actually do a little intro for the folks. Hopefully anybody else who comes in, I'll put a message in the window after, but I'll just say this. For the participants, thanks for coming, first of all, and making the time. If you move your cursor around over the Zoom window, you'll see little icons pop up at the bottom there, and one of them will say chat. You can put questions into the Q&A or the chat window. My preference is for everybody to just use the chat, because the Q&A window often is people kind of like put something in and I miss it because most people put it in the chat window. So I actually think in the future I'm just going to disable the Q&A and tell everybody to do their questions in the chat window. What will happen is I'm going to do a little brief intro for today's webinar, and then the webinar presentation will go on, and then at the end we're going to do all the questions. If somebody asks a question that's super pertinent to what's going on at the moment on the screen, or something like, you know, can I get clarification on what this means on the current slide, that kind of thing, I may interrupt to ask Amy to clarify or to answer a question. Other than that, we'll save all the questions to the end, and we'll go through them pretty much in order. Sometimes I jump around just if there's a couple questions that are kind of related. So but just to let you know, that's how things will go down. So again, if you have any questions, type them into the chat window, and I will actually put that message in the chat window. And we'll get going. And oh, look at that, it's 2:02 already, so we can start. Okay. My name is Phil Sparling. I'm the Executive Director of the Canadian Association of Postdoctoral Scholars, and I'd like to welcome you all here to our second webinar of the week in honor of Postdoctoral Appreciation Week 2019. And today we are joined by Amy Reckling. Amy is, I'm forgetting the wording, a program officer, thank you, in the Scholarship and Fellowships Division of the Natural Sciences and Engineering Research Council of Canada, also known as NSERC. Amy holds a joint BSc honors in chemistry and physics from Memorial University and a master's in organic chemistry from the University of Ottawa. Prior to joining the Scholarships and Fellowships Division of NSERC, Amy spent the early years of her career as a laboratory tech with Exova AccuTest and as a career development leader with the Chemical Institute of Canada. Amy is passionate about supporting early career researchers and currently working as a program officer for NSERC, where she manages the Scholarships and Fellowships Selection Committee for Chemistry. So Amy has a lot of experience with NSERC at this point, I would say. You've been around for how many years now, I think?
This will be my third full competition going through. And then, of course, NSERC has been something that's been in my periphery since I was a bachelor student, so lots of knowledge there.
Yeah, and I can imagine this is probably like, I don't know, the umpteenth presentation you've done about these this kind of presentation for doing the applications and whatnot. So we're very happy to be joined by Amy today, and I'm gonna just pass it over to Amy, and we're gonna get started.
All right, so I'm just gonna go straight ahead and share my screen with everyone participating today and get started on this presentation. Thank you all for being here. There we go. All right. So, as Joe mentioned, I work as a program officer here at NSERC. Today's presentation will start off with a description of some of the equity, diversity, and inclusion initiatives that are currently underway here at NSERC as they pertain to our fellowships programs. I'll outline our postdoctoral fellowship program as well as some other affiliated programs with NSERC that you might not have known about, but which you might be interested in applying for. I'll give an overview of our online system, so how to fill out your application form, and finally get into some tips and advice. So things that we've noticed over the years, things that we've been hearing from our selection committee members as to what makes a truly strong application. So we'll start off with some EDI. NSERC is committed to implementing policies and processes which identify and mitigate barriers and biases within our programs. Specifically, NSERC's focus here is examining the research teams and the research design within Canada. So we really want to access the largest pool of qualified applicants and to make sure that that pool is extensive, representative, and diverse. Also the research design. So we would like our researchers to be examining what they're proposing to do just to make sure that all possible targeted groups are included within their research, to make sure that the designs that are coming to us and that we're funding are as rigorous as possible. Ooh. Oh no. There you go. So some considerations that you might want to take into account when you are thinking about this for your own research proposals, either this year or for next year's competition, depending on what your plans are for applying to our programs. We have asked all of our applicants this year, both to the fellowships program as well as to our grants program, to consider sex, gender, and diversity in their research design as they are crafting their proposals. What we want people to consider or to ask themselves is who your research subjects and end users are, and what the consequences would be of not including this in your research. Some additional resources are listed here. This presentation will be circulated to you via PDF after the webinar today, so you'll be able to access these yourself as well. I've linked our framework on equity, diversity, and inclusion, as well as NSERC's guide for applicants, which gives an overall guidance, some guidelines that you can use as you're trying to consider this for your research. As a scientist, I found it initially a bit difficult to understand exactly how these types of considerations might be applicable to my work or to the work of natural scientists and engineers. And I found this Gendered Innovations website to actually be incredibly useful. It presents a number of case studies of natural sciences and engineering work that has been done where the research was strengthened by including sex, gender, and diversity considerations. So if you're trying to figure out where this fits within your research, take a look at the examples and case studies there. They might be, I hope you find them as helpful as I did. Pertaining to what you would be filling out this year in your application forms, in order to complete an application for the NSERC Postdoctoral Fellowship or any of the applications to fellowship programs with the 3 granting agencies, so that's the Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council, SSHRC, the Canadian Institutes for Health Research, and NSERC, you will have to respond to mandatory self-identification questions. There will always with these be the option to select I prefer not to answer, but the purpose here is to monitor the equity performance of our programs in order to inform future measures and to increase equity, diversity, and inclusion within the research enterprise in Canada. This was mandated by the Canada Research Coordinating Committee in Budget 2018. And while the agencies were previously collecting some information, we weren't asking the same questions. It wasn't consistent. So now we have 4 questions that we ask all candidates who apply for fellowships or grants at NSERC, which will allow us to have comparable data that we can actually examine after a 5-year period and determine whether there are any changes that need to be made to our programs. These 4 questions will be asking about age and gender, about Indigenous identity, about whether you identify as a person with a disability, and whether you identify as a visible minority in Canada. Again, these are always accompanied with the option to select I prefer not to answer, but in order to complete an application, you do have to select an answer to these questions, be it yes, no, or I prefer not to answer. Just to give you some peace of mind here, these results are not seen by the selection committee members who are reviewing your applications. They are not seen by the your references that you invite to provide a reference for your application, and they are not seen by the majority of NSERC staff in individual detail. The only people who will see your specific answers to these questions are staff at NSERC who have been deemed need to know. Something new this year, which may be applicable to you, whether you have NSERC funding or whether you might have a portion of your salary paid through your PI's NSERC Discovery Grant, is that our paid parental leave policy as of April 1st, 2019 has been extended from 6 months to 12 months of funding. So yes, this is for fellowship holders, but again, if you are funded through a researcher's discovery grant, this also applies to you. The portion of your stipend that comes from their grant could be provided to you for that full 12-year paid parental leave period. If this does apply to you, the forms are available online, and if you have any questions, please get in touch with us. We are happy to provide you with further direction on how to take advantage of this option. So from there, I'm going to move into our various postdoctoral fellowships programs, what the eligibility and selection criteria are, and how to apply using NSERC's online system. Our flagship postdoctoral fellowship is valued at $45,000 per year for 2 years. The application deadline is just under a month away, October 17th at 8 p.m. Now, something I will say here and will probably repeat later in the presentation, don't wait until 7 p.m. on October 17th to submit your application. Our servers, the reality with what we have here at NSERC is that the servers are overloaded on the final deadline day, especially in the 3 or 4 hours leading up to the application deadline. So I would actually recommend that you set your personal deadline for your submission as October 16th, just to make sure that you don't end up with any issues submitting your application. The announcement of the awards will take place at the end of January. I want to note that all of our communications on whether there are any issues with your application, if you are rejected, if you receive an award, are done through email. So be sure that the email that you enter in the online application form is an email account that you check frequently and that it is accurate and there are no typos. We want to make sure that we are able to get in touch with you and that you don't miss an email because it goes to your junk mail and you weren't checking that account for a couple of weeks. The location of tenure, you can hold a postdoctoral fellowship at Canadian universities, at provincial research institutions in Canada, other appropriate research laboratories in Canada, as well as university and research centers in foreign countries, provided that your PhD was received from a Canadian institution. If your PhD is received abroad, then you must hold your NSERC fellowship within Canada. Also, you cannot hold an NSERC fellowship at a federal government lab. Now, some other restrictions on the location of tenure, which I'll also get into later, are that you are not supposed to hold an NSERC fellowship at your PhD granting institution, and under no circumstances can you hold your NSERC postdoctoral fellowship with the same supervisor that you had during your PhD studies. Regarding the PhD granting institution, you can, in exceptional circumstances, request that the committee allow you to hold your PDF at your PhD granting institution. But the committee, when you ask them this, they will vote on whether this is allowable or not. So while you can request the exception, it is not guaranteed that the exception will be granted. In order to apply, you must be a Canadian citizen or permanent resident of Canada. Important note here, you can only apply once to the PDF program, so choose the time that you decide to apply wisely. This can be before you finish your PhD, after you finish your PhD. It has to be within 2 years of the completion date of your PhD, so that would be October 17th, 2017 this year. And you have to hold or expect to hold a doctorate in one of the fields of research that NSERC supports. Your postdoctoral fellowship, if it receives funding from NSERC, does have to be in the natural sciences and engineering. Some exceptions to the 2-year eligibility window: if you have received, or if you have done 6 months of a full-time relevant work experience in an industry or government lab, then that period is extended to 3 years. Similarly, if you've had your career interrupted for family or medical reasons, or if you became a parent, that period is also extended to 3 years. And finally, if you became the primary caregiver of a child either within 2 years before or after the completion of your PhD, then the eligibility window is extended to 6 years in that case. This is all clearly outlined in our program literature online, so take a look there. And if you have any additional questions, always feel free to either type it into the chat window to ask at the end of the presentation today. You can send me an email or a general Scala inbox as well. Reviewers will evaluate each application using these 2 selection criteria. 70% of the evaluation will be based on your research ability and potential, and 30% on communication, interpersonal, and leadership abilities. Once you submit your application through the online system, I work with the selection committee for chemistry, so all of the applications that were submitted to that selection committee come to me to verify eligibility. I read the research proposals as well and then assign them to the most appropriate members to review and score. Each application initially will be reviewed by 3 of the members of the selection committee who will score them. From there, we get the scores back, we make a ranked list, and the top ranked applications will be discussed at a virtual meeting in December. Based on the final ranked list and the number of awards that are allowable within our budget this year, the results will be announced at the end of January. So again, keep an eye to your email, especially in January, which is when you'd find out whether you were successful in receiving your award. This is for statistical purposes. The main point of this slide is really to show that in the past 5 years, the approximate success rate for the postdoctoral fellowships program has been 30 to 35%. All applications to this program are received directly by NSERC. So if you are currently at an institution within Canada, there is nothing that goes through the institution. It's not like our doctoral program where there's an initial competition at the institution before it comes to NSERC. All NSERC postdoctoral fellowships are submitted directly to NSERC through the online platform. Often people will ask us whether you should apply before or after the PhD is granted. I'm not sure if anyone would really be in that situation today. But you also might think, should I submit my application during the first year of my postdoc or the second year of my postdoc? We've been tracking statistics on this since the one-time only application requirement was initiated in 2013. And for people who haven't yet received their PhD certification versus those who've had their PhD granted, there's no real relationship between that and the success rate. At the end of the day, our selection committee members are asked to take into account the stage of your career when you apply. So when they evaluate applications, it's not a one-size-fits-all evaluation. They know that somebody who's just starting their postdoc is not going to be at the same stages of their career as somebody who's applying to this fellowship when they've already been held a postdoctoral fellowship position for over a year. So that's not something to worry about. The selection committee members will take that into account when they're reviewing your application. They know, again, like the number of publications isn't going to be the same by somebody, by someone who is early in their career versus somebody who has been, who has more experience and has been working as a postdoc for a longer period of time.
Amy?
Yeah.
Sorry to interject.
Oh, no problem.
I actually had a question come in a little while ago, and I think it might be pertinent to a few people in the audience.
Sure.
My understanding is that temporary residents in Canada, they are not able to apply at all for
No. So the only tri-agency programs that are open to foreign citizen applicants are the Banting Postdoctoral Fellowship, which I'll mention in a moment. For the NSERC Postdoctoral Fellowship, you have to be a Canadian citizen or permanent resident of Canada at the time of application in order to be eligible to hold the award.
Right. Okay. I just wanted to make sure everybody knew that in case, because I had a few questions come in about it. And now I will remember to mute myself this time so you don't listen to my keyboard typing.
I barely noticed it, to be honest, but yes.
Thank you.
No problem at all. Let me know if there's any more questions that are pertinent to the slides. Don't mind being interrupted at all. All right, so some additional funding opportunities that perhaps you don't know about, but you might be interested in looking into. The Banting Postdoctoral Fellowship, as I just mentioned, this is a tri-agency program valued at $70,000 per year for 2 years. This is open to both Canadian citizens and permanent residents of Canada, as well as foreign citizens. This wouldn't be something that would be feasible for this year, but this is actually the perfect time to start looking into this program for next year's deadline. The application itself is a bit more involved than the NSERC Postdoctoral Fellowship. One of the requirements is a synergistic agreement between yourself and the institution that you're proposing to hold the award at. So there's actually quite a lot of back and forth between the institution and the applicant as you both work on the preparation of that application before it is submitted to the Vanier-Banting Secretariat for review. You can hold this at a Canadian or foreign university or affiliated hospitals, colleges, and not-for-profit organizations which have a strong research mandate and capacity. These awards typically will have a bit of a stronger emphasis on the leadership and synergistic agreement between the candidate and the proposed host institution. But again, if you think that this is something that you're interested in and that you would like to apply for, start reaching out to institutions now. They'll be able to tell you whether you would be a good fit for this program within their institution, and it is the perfect time to start considering it. A note on the eligibility window here, for the Banting Postdoctoral Fellowship, you do have a 3-year window. So the cutoff deadline for finishing your PhD in order to be eligible to apply this year was September 16th, 2016, whereas for NSERC we have a 2-year eligibility window. There is also no maximum number of times that you can apply to a Banting Postdoctoral Fellowship. So if you're not successful with your NSERC this year, then this might be something that you might want to consider for future years. The Japan Society for the Promotion of Science also has a very interesting partnership with NSERC. We administer this program on their behalf within Canada, so we review applications and will recommend candidates to JSPS to hold the Japan Society for the Promotion of Science PDF. This can be for a period between 12 and 24 months. As you can see, a later deadline, so the deadline for this is February 1st at 8 p.m. Honestly, if you have any interest in studying abroad in Japan, I would highly recommend this program. It's relatively unknown within the community from what I can tell, so the success rate is quite high. Not open to foreign citizens, you do have to be a Canadian citizen or permanent resident of Canada, and again, a bit of a longer eligibility window. So you have 6 years after the completion of your first doctoral degree to apply for this fellowship. If you have any questions, this is not applied to through the online system, it's separate, so send an email to that email listed here, scott@nsirc-crsng.gc.ca, and that you'll be forwarded the application form and instructions for completing the application. Last year, NSERC also signed an agreement with the Canada Mortgage and Housing Corporation. This is for research that fits within the National Housing Strategy, namely housing for those in greatest need, social housing, sustainability, Indigenous housing, northern housing, sustainable housing and communities, and a balanced supply of housing. If any of that research is relevant to you, you might want to consider submitting a supplementary one-page justification through the secure submission site within NSERC's website. Otherwise, the application process is exactly the same as for the main NSERC postdoctoral fellowship application. You'd submit your postdoctoral fellowship application like anyone else, and then you would go to the secure submission site and upload a justification explaining how your research fits and helps to achieve the goals of the National Housing Strategy. Again, if you have any questions about this, please either go online, take a look at the literature, or send an email, and you'll be put in touch with the program officer who works most closely with the CMHC on that partnership. A couple of outreach programs that you may be interested in. The NSERC Student Ambassadors is open to students and postdocs. The goal of this microfunding program is to share natural science and engineering experience with youth who are members of an underrepresented group within Canada. So, for example, if you want to do science outreach to youth who go to school in a rural township that might not have the same access to science resources as somebody who might live in Vancouver or Toronto, then you could apply for $1,000 of funding from NSERC. It's a very easy process. You need to submit your planned activity or outline of that plan to the ambassador's email address listed at the bottom of the screen 2 months in advance of when you plan to run the activity. It does have to be organized independently. So if you're a member of Let's Talk Science, you can't ask us for $1,000 to fund a Let's Talk Science official event. You could, for example, borrow materials or modules from a different organization as long as the event that you're running is independently organized by you and doesn't have an official affiliation with them. The $1,000 can really cover anything. It could be your travel, your materials, promotion for the event, anything related to the logistics of organizing or running this outreach activity. A similar program is the NSERC Indigenous Student Ambassadors, which supports Indigenous students or fellows visiting Indigenous communities or schools. It's a higher value here, so this is to cover travel costs up to $5,000. So the application process is a bit more involved. It's through the secure site on NSERC. Again, if this is something that might pertain to you, that you're interested in, email the ambassador's email address at the bottom of the screen here, and we can give you all the information that you would need to get your application together. Again, similar to the previous NSERC Student Ambassadors program, the application needs to be submitted 2 months in advance of the activity that you're running. So with that, I'll briefly get into how to apply using the online system. So we'll go through the different sections that you'll need to fill out as part of your online application, and then I'll also move into some tips and tricks for how to make the strongest application you can for this program. The easiest way to access the online system is either to Google it or to go to the NSERC landing page. There is a login button at the top right-hand side of the screen that will link you directly to the NSERC online system, where you can either log in and keep editing an application that you've been working on, or if you haven't done so yet, you would need to create an account. Once you select that you want to create an application for the postdoctoral fellowship program, you'll get into the Form 201, which is a screenshot shown here. On the left-hand side, you can see the different modules of the application form that you need to complete prior to submitting your application. The first step is, of course, the title of your proposal and the proposed starting date of your award. Typically, the proposed starting date would be any time between May 2020 and January 2021. It is totally fine if you need to change your start date after you apply. If you initially intended to take it up right away in May, and there's been some delay and you need to change your starting date to September 2020, as long as it fits within that May 2020 to January 2021 activation window, you can start whatever date works best for you once you've actually received the award and have officially signed the contract for your postdoctoral fellowship or the agreement with the institution where you'll be holding it. Academic background. Here you would list any previous natural sciences and engineering degrees that you have completed. If any of you have applied for a postdoctoral or postgraduate scholarship in the past, for that program, you would need to submit transcripts for everything listed here. That is not the case for the postdoctoral fellowship. You do need to list your previous degrees, but you only have to provide up-to-date transcripts for your doctoral studies. You can also list up to 6 previous jobs that have helped to build up your skills as a scientist or engineer or communicator. This could include TA-ships, working as a research assistant for a professor. If you had a stint with industry, you can put that work experience here too. It's really at your discretion. Anything that you think will help educate the selection committee on the steps that you've taken professionally to build up your skills as a communicator, a leader, a scientist. There is an option to enter up to 10 scholarships or other awards in this awards section. These don't have to be monetary value. It's totally fine if the value is $0. That is not an issue. The only requirement here is that it should be a competitive award. So that is not necessarily something where an official competition was held. If it's an entrance scholarship or something like that, definitely list that here. It just needs to be an award that wasn't given to every student, for example, every PhD student at the institution where you studied. So anything that, any award that you were given or have received, that could be conference awards, presentation awards, stuff like that as well, can be listed here. Yeah.
I did have a question come in that I think is on track here.
Perfect.
So the question was, so there's no need to fill out the common CCV just to confirm for the applicant, the references, and the supervisor?
No, so the CCV has nothing to do with this program. All you have to do, you create one account for the online application form, and that is where all the information for your application goes. You don't have to fill in a CCV.
And a couple other questions that are kind of on this track as well. Are teaching assistantships considered a competitive award?
I would put that in work experience more than in the awards section. That would be where we typically expect to see the teaching assistantships.
And one other question on this line, honors. So if you have an honors in your degree, is that something that you would list here? Or
that would go in your academic background.
So just include that with your academic information. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
No problem. In the scholarships and awards offered section, it's possible that you might have more than 10 things to list here, in which case you'll need to be selective. What I would recommend personally is if you do have that many awards to list, try and have a mixture of things that highlight your communication ability. So if you got an award for a poster or oral presentation at a conference, as well as your academic scholarships. So try and list awards that show the breadth of your skills and abilities. You have the option to list up to 3 potential location of tenure for your PDF. Especially if you are planning to request an exception to the rule that you can't hold your postdoctoral fellowship at the same institution where you were granted your PhD, I would definitely fill in at least 2 locations. You want to be absolutely certain that one of the locations that you have listed is you are eligible to hold your award at that institution. If you request an exception to a requirement or an eligibility requirement and you don't put an alternate location of tenure and your request is denied by the committee, then we have to reject the application. So just make sure there is at least 1 location of tenure that you are absolutely certain that you will be eligible to hold the award at. For the PDF program, there will be some expectation from the selection committee that there's been some thought and care put into your proposed location of tenure. So, you know, if you list a certain institution and then the research that you're proposing couldn't actually be carried out there, that would raise a red flag to the committee. Similarly, it's not required that you have contacted your proposed supervisor, but it is advantageous to do so, as it shows the committee that you've really been working towards securing a location where you can hold your PDF. This can be elaborated on in the justification for location of tenure section. So this is really where you can explain how the location or locations that you've listed in the previous section will really fit you and your direction, your path as a researcher. So how will this help to jumpstart your career? What specialized equipment is available at the institution that isn't available elsewhere? Why is your proposed supervisor going to be the right person for you to work with as you prepare for the next steps in your career. Further, as I mentioned before, if you are requesting an exception to the location of tenure requirement that you hold your award at a institution that is different from your PhD granting institution, this is a section where you would outline your justification and your request for this. Again, as I mentioned, this may or may not be allowed by the committee. During the discussion of your application, the committee will discuss this request and they will vote on whether they will allow it to occur or not. So again, if you are making that request, make sure that you have an alternate location of tenure where you're certain you'll be able to hold the award.
Amy?
Yeah.
I had a couple of questions, very similar ones actually, come in regarding this. So with respect to contacting supervisors at the institutions, I'm assuming you need to have contacted this person ahead of time. You can't just suggest someone who doesn't know who you are.
You can. Technically, like, you would not be rejected for suggesting a supervisor that you haven't contacted, but in terms of the competitiveness of the application among other applications, it will definitely be an indicator of drive to the committee to see that you have actually already made contact with the supervisor and that you've discussed potential projects, right? Like, ideally, the research that you're proposing would be linked to that lab somehow. So you've made contact with the supervisor and you're proposing to do this research work at that institution. So having everything linked together will make for an overall stronger and more cohesive application. That being said, if, for example, like you're still in your PhD or something like that, then there might be slightly lower expectations that you've made concrete plans with the supervisor at this point. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, I think it answers it fully. So you can do it, but it's probably best to be more competitive to have actually made that contact and have the plans.
Yeah.
Great. Thank you.
No problem. In the thesis information section, this is where you would list previous degrees where a thesis has been completed, and then you'd also provide a summary of your most recently completed thesis. In the case of a postdoctoral fellowship, that summary would probably be of your PhD work. I take extra care here. So you have this summary of thesis where you have space to provide details or to summarize your most recently completed thesis, especially for the postdoc. Going forward into the research proposal section, make sure that there's no overlap between your summary of thesis completed and your postdoctoral fellowship. Like, there might be a link there, but there should definitely be no duplication of information. I can say usually the selection committee is looking to see that from your PhD work, you're looking to expand your skills and to expand your research knowledge. So just take care there, make sure that there's no duplicated information in your summary thesis and your proposed research. Before you submit your application, you will select a research subject code that will determine which selection committee reviews your application. There's a link here in the description that says list of research subject codes for scholarships and fellowships. This actually in detail lists all of the available research subject codes to fellowship applicants and will show which selection committee that your application will go to based on the research subject code that you select. Be cautious here. Each selection committee can only be linked with one, like a research subject code will not fall under two selection committees. So I work with the selection committee for chemistry. We get biochemistry applications every year, but if you were to submit a biochemistry research subject code, your application would go to the cellular and molecular biology committee for review. So just take care here, take a look at the list, make sure that you're sending your application to the selection committee that is best suited to review your work in your opinion. If you do have interdisciplinary research and you have to pick a code that you don't think perfectly fits your research, that's fine. You can further specify what exactly your proposed research entails in the 10 keywords. These are the 13 selection committees at the national level that will be evaluating applications. Just to give you an idea of what the makeup is here, so we have researchers from all over Canada, every region of Canada, They cover and can review applications submitted in both official languages. We also have international members and members who come from industry. So very broad representation. You'll hear me saying this later in the tips and advice section, but this is one of the reasons that we strongly recommend that you keep your research proposals written in very clear, precise language and to avoid jargon, because, you know, the selection committees are only so big, they cover quite a wide depth. So part of the challenge of these applications is to be able to clearly communicate the research that you're proposing to do to a broad audience who is within your field, but maybe not necessarily an expert in your specific topic. Again, take care with the research subject code you select, as this determines the selection committee that will receive your application for review. Also for the selection committees, I do want to note before I move on that the membership of each selection committee is actually publicly available online. So if you search NSERC selection committees just in Google, then you'll be directed to a page that lists the selection committee, and if you click on the selection committee, it will show a list of the current members. So if you are trying to decide between two different committees, that's a really good way for helping you to help you make that decision. You can see who the researchers are in those committees and take a look, see what their specialties are, and determine from there which committee you think would be best suited to review the work that you're proposing. Previously, special circumstances were actually part of a different freeform section of the application, and we've decided to make it its own optional half-page attachment this year. So what you put in this section are things that might have caused delay in your productivity or performance. This could be family responsibilities, parental leave, health problems, if you had a child, if you were dealing with a disability, any other really applicable circumstances that you think that the committee should be aware of as they review your application, which otherwise might result in your application being at a disadvantage because they don't have the information that they need in order to properly assess your particular application. If for some reason you are not able to have your PhD supervisor provide one of your references, this would be a place where you would explain that situation to the selection committee. It's really important to provide them context for anything in the application that's going to give them pause or make them ask a question. One of those things would be if your most recent supervisor was not one of your references, they'll want to know why. Also, if you were eligible for one of those extensions to the application window, so either you were working in industry and got a one-year extension, or you were dealing with family responsibilities and were eligible for that one-year extension, you'd make a note about that here as well. These don't have to be super detailed. A couple of sentences is fine. Again, it's really just to provide context to the reviewers so that they can review your application in the most equitable way possible. So what I'm going to do now is to move into some advice and tips. I'll briefly show about a 5-minute video that we made with some of our National Selection Committee members a few years ago, and then get into some final slides on tips for writing the research proposal and common errors and mistakes that we see here at NSERC. Before then, are there any questions that have come in that might be addressed right now?
I think we're good. The questions that have come in, I think, can wait till the question period.
Okay, perfect.
The experts agree that there are a number of ways you can make your application stand out from the pack. It begins with expressing your passion and showing the impact of the work you propose to do.
It's important for the students to prepare the application thinking about how they feel about the research, why they're excited about it, why this is an important problem that's worth them putting their time and energy into. And if you are excited about it yourself and you try to get that across in the application, that goes a long way, because if the person writing the application doesn't seem to be excited about the problem, it's really hard for me to get excited about the idea of supporting that application.
Montrez totalement que vous avez une connaissance et une maîtrise profonde de votre sujet. Faites-le lire par votre superviseur précédent, si vous le voulez. C'est une très bonne façon de montrer une description adéquate du projet.
So an opening sentence that grabs the reader's attention and then leads into what they really would like to do, even though they may not solve any of the world's big global challenges, but at least show they're aware of them and show that they can see where their research may ultimately play a role in dealing with some of the challenges of the day. You don't want your previous thesis research to be a copy of what you're going to put into your proposed research. So forward-looking things in your proposed research, really illustrating your creativity, highlighting what your strategy is to get the work done that you want to do, what the impact of what you're going to do, how it's going to impact essentially, not only your colleagues in your research lab, but also perhaps Canada or the world.
When you describe your accomplishments, it's important to make sure that reviewers are aware of your academic achievements and the contributions you have made to advancing science.
Donc, dans la section libre, après la présentation des contributions, ce qu'on cherche, c'est voir l'impact du candidat dans son domaine. Donc, puisque démontrer que les travaux ont été utilisés, ça peut être des citations, ça peut être quelqu'un qui l'utilise dans la vraie vie, n'importe quoi qui démontre que les travaux sont importants et qui ont de l'impact.
Communicate how you've been successful in the past with your research. So including not only what you've achieved, but also any roadblocks that you had to move through, any hurdles you had to overcome. Did you have to find any equipment to make your research work? Tell me a story about yourself and how you've really grown as a researcher and as a person that wants to receive this investment.
It's very good if the student has won awards for those oral presentations. The student must make sure that they point that out. I've seen examples where the student neglects to tell us that they won an award, but fortunately, they get a letter from someone who says, look, at the regional conference in whatever the discipline was, this student won first or second place for their oral contribution. Things like that are really important.
Elaborate on what your role was in each of the publications, your three most important publications, or if you have one publication, that's fine. But really explain what your role and contribution was. It's not always easy to discern from the author list, if you're not the first author, what your contribution was. And even if you're second or third or even later author, you could have played a key role in that. So explain what that is.
Members of the selection committees also look for attributes beyond your research abilities. It's important to point out your strengths in other areas, such as community participation and communication.
We're looking to support people that bring the science out of the universities and into the communities and into the industries. We're looking for people who can lead our country forward in science. And that's only done if we see that there's evidence that people really want to do that. Are they interested in being involved in their university groups? Are they interested in going into the community and showing their passion for science? Can they communicate with their fellow scientists and their fellow students about what it is they do?
So it's the extra things that really count, and particularly communications and leadership. So if they need to really be able to show, they can't just say that they were secretary of the whatever society at their university or that they were a social convener. They need to indicate what they did. And activities like that and showing that they have developed their communication skills, that all goes together with helping them to get a higher score in the competition.
It's the chance where you get to freeform and freestyle your application, and it's really important to take the time to integrate that information together into a complete package that really reflects who you are. And that includes things like dance classes or music or sports that you may have been part of as well. Volunteer opportunities are a really great chance for the committee to really understand who you are.
Okay. All right, so just reiterating a couple of points, well, some additional points here. Good things to do before you submit your application: read the program description, read the application instructions. They are extremely detailed and meticulously written. What I would recommend is copying and pasting the entire set of applications into a Word document or something where you can go through each line before you actually submit and cross off once you've completed that step, just to make sure that you've met all the eligibility requirements, you've done everything correctly, and your application will not be rejected because of a technicality. Read the selection committee guide. This is actually what we provide to selection committee members to help guide them in their review of applications. So if you want to formulate an application that will be well received by the committee, I might look there to make sure that I'm addressing all the points that they're looking for in my application prior to submitting. The resource video that we just saw, we have a list, or well, a whole series playlist of videos that are similarly targeted towards helping you get your application together. So take a look at those as well. The link to that video is included in the slides, so you'll be able to access it once you get a copy of the presentation from today. The research proposal itself is a separate attachment, free form, 2 pages. There are requirements for formatting that are listed on the website as well and in the application instructions, so make sure you take a look at those. The research proposal, the 2 pages, includes references. To give some context for last year, this is an increase in length. So last year, applicants had 1 page for both their research proposal and to include references. With this increased page limit, it means that as an applicant, you will have to be more careful than ever to make sure that you're providing a well-crafted, well-structured, focused research proposal for selection committee members. You have more space than people in previous years, so the expectation is going to be that these are well thought out, well put together, well cited research proposals. To help with that, as I mentioned earlier, ask yourself those questions. Who are your subjects? Who are the end users? Should I be incorporating equity, diversity, and inclusion into this research proposal to make my work more rigorous? Ask that question now. If it's applicable to you, add it in. If it's not applicable, that's totally fine as well. You will not be docked points for not including it if it's not applicable to your research. Make sure that you write the proposal yourself. This may seem obvious, but it can't be an extract from your supervisor's grant proposal. You can certainly have other people review your proposal to provide feedback, but the work itself needs to have you at the core of the ideas. Make your proposal clear for reviewers. As I mentioned, each selection committee is made up of approximately 10 to 15 members, depending on the number of applications that we typically receive in a year. So you might be having your research proposal reviewed by 1 person who's an expert in your field, but it's unlikely that all 3 people reviewing that proposal are going to be experts in your particular area. You're writing for people who work in your general area. So, you know, if I get an application into the committee for chemistry, you'd be writing for other chemists, but you might not be writing for 3 people who are all polymer chemists, for example. So make sure that you can communicate your ideas well to people who have a background in what you're doing, but who are not experts. That means avoiding jargon. Make sure you define your acronyms. Even if it's an acronym that's really well known in your area, other people might not be aware of it, and it makes it difficult for them to understand what you're saying and for them to see the impact and the significance of the research that you're proposing. On that note, explain the significance of your project. Make sure that you say why it is important. Give an overview, contextualize it within your field. Why is this important, and why is it different than what other people are doing? Make sure that you provide good methodology for achieving the goals that you are outlining in your proposed research. Often that is a weakness that is noted, is that, you know, there's not a detailed methodology given here, so they don't know how the applicant is proposing to actually know when they have the results they're looking for. How are they going to measure this? So make sure that you do have your methodology included as well. And then conclusions and future work, future directions, if you do achieve what it is that you are proposing. Convey your passion. This really comes across in the writing. Even to me as a program officer, if I am reading a research proposal, it's so clear when somebody is excited about what they're proposing to do. And that comes through to the reviewers too. At the end of the day, you want to have a proposal that all 3 of the people who are initially reviewing that application, and all 10 or 15 members, if it makes it to the in-person competition portion of the national competition, you want them all to be equally as excited about what you're doing as you are. So, you know, try to have that come through in the writing. And again, be clear and specific. You want people to be able to understand what it is that you're proposing. Often applicants will be doing research in interdisciplinary fields. For the purposes of NSERC, we fund research whose major challenges lie in the natural sciences and engineering. This could be something that has future applications in health, or might, like if you're studying the design of a potential drug. If it's in the fundamental stages, that is NSERC eligible. If you are doing this type of research, I would strongly recommend that you submit this optional one-page attachment for the justification of your research. This isn't seen by the selection committee, but it is seen by NSERC program staff, so it really helps them to be able to verify that your application and the research that you're proposing definitely lies within the fundamental natural sciences and engineering research. If you're uncertain about whether your application or your research would be best suited to NSERC, CIHR, or SSHRC, there are links here on this slide as well to the guidelines. So selecting the appropriate federal granting agency, which gives an outline of the research mandates of the 3 agencies and generally what falls within the research funding for each of those 3 agencies. This addendum table is also very useful. It is NSERC specific, but it is a table of research proposals that we've actually received that are very similar, where one was eligible for funding and one was not. So that helps to give an idea of, whether your research falls in the questionable zone or whether it is still eligible for NSERC funding. What a lot of people are not aware of as well is that as you can submit a draft of your research proposal to NSERC program staff in advance of the application deadline, and we can provide you advice and feedback on this. So if you think that it might be, if you think that the subject matter may not be eligible for NSERC, send us your proposal and we are happy to review it. I'm personally much happier to review a proposal before the application deadline and to be able to provide advice on whether it belongs with NSERC or whether it belongs with CIHR, or if it does belong with NSERC, some tips on how you might be able to better focus the goals to focus on the natural sciences and engineering components of that research. So definitely take advantage of that if it's applicable to you. The contributions and statements section can be up to 4 pages for postdoctoral applicants. This is free form again. It is made up of 3 parts, but the length that you assign to each part is at your discretion. Part 1 is contributions to research and developments. So this is articles published, accepted, or submitted only. If you are currently working on an article but it hasn't been submitted, it should not be included. This also includes conference presentations, either poster presentations, oral presentations. If you've previously worked in industry, you can also list technical reports here. Part 2, you take 3 things that you listed in part 1 and then elaborate on your role. So this shouldn't be a copy and paste of the abstract for the article. For example, the selection committee is going to be looking for you to describe what your exact role in the research and the project, in leading the project, maybe in writing the paper, would be. Up to you on how much space, again, that you use to describe your role in those 3 contributions, but do take the time to properly describe that role. Part 3 is the applicant's statement, where you can outline your skills, experiences, and qualities demonstrating your excellence to the committee. This was mentioned in the video that I showed, but this is the portion where you can really allow the selection committee to have some insight into what you do in your life. So, do you coach basketball on Wednesdays? What have you done for mentoring students? What other activities and experiences have you gone through that make you particularly suited to receive this funding, that are going to make you a great scientist going down the road? You can choose not to complete one of these sections. You should note it within the freeform section, but I would say there, I would not recommend not filling in either part 1, part 2, or part 3 of this section unless there are very specific circumstances. It will very likely result in your application being at a disadvantage during evaluation.
Amy?
Yeah.
Can I just jump in on that last slide? We had a question come in. It just says, can the description of 3 contributions be topic specific as opposed to paper specific? So it would include more than 1 relevant publication?
Yeah, that's a good question. So If you submitted a paper that also overlaps with conference presentations that you listed in that area, or if one of the papers is a communication and one of them is a full paper, yeah, you can still describe that topic. So it would be the article or the list that you put into part 1, and that will have a specific title for the research associated, and then yeah, you would talk about your contribution to that project. That would be appropriate, yes.
Great. Thank you. No
problem. Transcripts, as I mentioned, for the postdoctoral fellowship, we only require your doctoral transcripts. If any of you haven't yet received, defended your thesis and officially received your doctoral certification or your doctoral diploma, we will require an official up-to-date transcript from the fall term of this year from the institution where you completed your PhD. Otherwise, the doctoral transcript should have been issued after your after you can, why am I blanking on the word? After you convocated. So it needs to show on your transcript that you did complete your degree requirements. Make sure that you follow the instructions carefully here. This is one of the common reasons that we have to reject an application. So please be sure that the documents you submit are up to date and official. One thing I'd like to note here, which we only have 2 slides left. So when you're on the online system, there is an option to export to PDF prior to the submission of your application. Please do so. Sometimes you never know, once you export to PDF, there could be formatting issues that come up where you need to re-edit one of the portions of your application. The last thing that you want is for your application to be at a disadvantage because you didn't check over the PDF file prior to submitting. So make sure that you do that. And when you export to PDF, you'll also be able to see the transcripts that you uploaded to the application file. Verify that those are legible and can be read. Sometimes they'll scan through and the result will be quite dark and you can't actually make out the text on the page. If the transcripts aren't able to be read, then the application will be rejected. So just make sure that you export to PDF prior to submitting, just to make sure that everything looks fine and that you're not going to be rejected for reasons of not being able to read the application. There are 2 reports on the applicant that will be submitted with your application. Choose your references carefully. For PDF, typically it will be your, one of those should be your PhD supervisor. Again, as I mentioned, if for some reason that is impossible, you can include that in your special circumstances section just to explain why they weren't able to provide that reference for you. If you haven't already invited your references, you should do so now. There is a section on the online application where you can enter the name and email address of the references that you want to invite. You can also see the status there, so whether they've received the invitation, if it's in progress, or if the reference has been completed. If you don't get it to them early enough and they aren't able to complete it by the deadline, you can't submit your application without the references. They both have to be submitted in the online system prior to you being able to submit your application. So I would recommend giving them an October 1st deadline for getting those to you. So when inevitably, all the professors or other people that we are inviting are quite busy, so when they need a week's extension to complete the letter, that will be no issue for you to give it to them.
I just want to say to people, and this is just a personal note, when you're talking to people about giving you reference letters, ask people very specifically, can you provide me with a supportive, positive reference letter for this? Don't just say, hey, can you give me a reference letter? Because I have seen reference letters that people were perfectly willing to provide that actually were not supportive. And nothing shoots your application in the foot faster than having one of your referees actually not support you. So be specific about what you're asking people. And if they're willing to let you look over the reference beforehand, I mean, a lot of folks will ask you to write it for them. I would ask that. Ask if you can take a look at the reference if it's appropriate in their mind or whatever. But do be careful not to just willy-nilly accept references from somebody that isn't actually going to support your proposal.
Yeah, those are good points. So you want it to be somebody who can speak well to your qualities, your skills, and your abilities as a researcher, as a scientist, as a leader, and somebody who's going to fill out the space as well. Something that we do see, not super frequently, but we do see every year, is somebody who has gone for a renowned researcher in their field to write them a reference, and the reference has been 3 sentences long and provides no information on the applicant. And that application will still be judged within the competition, but somebody who has 2 references who are filling in their full 2 pages of information are much more valuable and, you know, help the success of your application a lot more than somebody who either will give a poor reference or will not actually take the time to complete and fill out the full space available to them. To help with that, you can provide some background information, even if it is somebody who knows you really well. They probably have been asked to write more than one person a reference letter, very likely. So providing them with a bullet point list of the things that you have accomplished to help remind them of what you've been doing, even if it's something that they witnessed you do, is very helpful to them. We want to make their lives as easy as possible so that they can get you that reference in a timely manner. Take advantage of the space as well. So you have limited space to work with in this application. If there is something that you were not able to include in your 4-page applicant statement section or that free-form section we just spoke about, tell your reference, say, I was not able to include this in my own free-form application portion of my PDF application. Is there any way that you can try and work it into your reference letter? That's a really good idea to do if you have run out of space, because all the selection committee members will be reading the reference letters as well and using the information in there to help evaluate the application on the whole. A few final points. Common errors and mistakes that have been noted either by us or by our selection committee members. When the impact of the research proposal is not explained, so it wasn't contextualized within the field and the applicant didn't explain how what they were doing was different from what other people were already doing in that area. So just make sure that you really highlight that in your research proposal. Repetitiveness, as I mentioned, you have very limited space to work with, so the same information should not be repeated within the application multiple times. For missing citations, so this could be if you started writing your proposal and then last month a really exciting and very relevant citation came out on that topic, but that's missing from your research proposal. So make sure that the citations are relevant to what you're doing and that they're timely. Again, missing citations, and this is not exactly missing, but don't include irrelevant citations. Just try and have as well coiffed a list as you can there. You know, they do have to be included within the 2-page proposal, so the lists aren't typically too long. But just make sure you use relevant citations, timely citations, and that you don't include irrelevant citations. A lack of focus. This would be a proposal where there's lots of information, but it's the ideas are jumbled around and it's not really clear what the ultimate goal is. So you want to make sure when you're writing that proposal that you have one goal in mind and that everything that you're proposing in that proposal is working clearly towards that goal. So you don't want to leave your reviewers confused. You want them to be aware of what the focus of the proposal is, and you want everything in your proposal to be supporting that focus. Spelling and grammatical mistakes. As we all know, once you have been writing and rereading the same text over and over again, it is quite easy to miss small grammatical errors, such as substituting no for on. Stuff like that is so easy to miss, and it is ultimately quite minor, but if you are a selection committee member who is reviewing 30 or 40 applications, the one that has a numerous small grammatical errors is the one that's going to stand out to them. And again, you are being evaluated partly on your ability to communicate. What we suggest there, make sure to have a friend read your application, have your supervisor read it. They will be able to pick out those types of grammatical mistakes very easily because they haven't seen this work before. So take the time to do that. And finally, don't be modest. This isn't the time for modesty. This is the time to sell yourself. You are trying to show the selection committee why you deserve this funding. What was often seen are 2 applications where the content is virtually identical, but one person is really selling themselves and stating the importance of what they've been doing, and the other person is underselling themselves and sort of stating it as things that they've done, but not really explaining that it's exciting or noting that it's an important contribution. So my point here is just don't be modest. really, you've likely all accomplished a lot of very impressive and exciting things in your career so far. So take this time to sell them to the selection committee and show them why it is that you are a great scientist and you deserve to receive this funding.
Can I interject quick there, maybe?
Of course.
On the modesty thing, I've had quite a few conversations with postdocs over the years about this. And my one bit of advice for some folks who really struggle with selling themselves is to literally write it in as though you're talking about a friend of yours and whose work you think is really impressive. And then switch your name in there or change the reference to yourself and get other people's feedback on whether or not you think it's over the top, if you know what I mean. Because it honestly, for some folks, it's very difficult to write something compelling about themselves without feeling weird or silly. So
yeah.
Honestly, just switch your frame of mind and pretend you're trying to get your friend some funding.
Yeah, that's great advice. Almost as though you were writing a reference for like a really close friend of yours who you would want to receive this funding.
Yeah, and it's the same recommendation I give to people when they're asked. There are a lot of faculty members and whatnot that will ask you to write your own reference letters. It's really common. I'm sure NSERC this is not news to you folks. And they'll vet them, right? It's not like you're making up whatever you like. But I would say the same thing. In those reference letters, try to act like if you struggle with this, try to act like you're writing the reference about someone else, not about yourself, and then work with it from there. Because I find that's a big one for me is the reference letters, where if people do have to do that for someone, they really tend to undersell themselves compared to what another person would actually write about them.
Yeah, and actually, on that note, I wanted to point out something else. So I mentioned that the references, you would invite them through the online system. You can resend that invitation if they missed it or it went into their junk folder. In order to submit the reference actually will need to create, likely they already have one, but if they don't, they'll need to create an account in the online system as well. There are specific instructions for the references, so it instructs them how to submit that reference through the NSERC system. But what I would like to point out, which is not frequent, but it is something that I have seen in the past, is a reference who didn't read the instructions and they submitted technically text into the text box, so the reference showed up as being submitted, but what they had actually submitted was a link to an external source like Dropbox that had a freeform reference letter that didn't meet our requirements. And so because all we can evaluate is what is literally in that application package when it's exported to PDF, that application was deemed to be missing a key component and had to be rejected. Again, this does not happen often at all, but just a cautionary tale to make sure that your references know that they need to fill in the entire reference in those text box in the NSERC Online application, like in the online web form.
Mm-hmm. We did get a couple questions coming in about reference letters while we're on the topic.
Yes.
First one, if you're already a postdoc, can your current supervisor give one of the reference letters?
Yeah, it has to be somebody who knows you. So if you've been working with them for a while now and you think that they can give a good review of your skills and a good assessment, then that's absolutely appropriate. What we wouldn't want to see is somebody, if you just started working in a lab and you've known your supervisor for only a week, they probably wouldn't be able to give you a very accurate reference. That will be notable to the selection committee. There is a portion where the reference says how long they've known you. But yeah, if you've been working there already for some time, then that would be absolutely appropriate.
Cool. And one other one on references, is there a way to review references to make sure the reference is right?
No, there is no way to review it. That's why I brought that up. Just you can double check with the references, but I would send maybe just a small reminder to say, I don't know, you could say, I went to an NSERC presentation and the program officer made a specific note that the references have to be filled in the text boxes in the online web form. So I just wanted to double check that was the case. Yeah. Or something like that.
And like I suggested, if people are open to it, to sending you the reference for you to look at it at a time, then you can even, that's one way to make sure that they're not going to try and do something like that, I guess. But yeah, giving them all the information, like you said, warning them about stuff like that is.
Yeah, and again, that is not something that is common at all, but just something that I like people should be aware of because it has happened, so better safe than sorry. That's actually all for the presentation. So this is our contact information here. scroll@nsrc.crsng.gc.ca is our general email inbox. To get a hold of me specifically, if you want to substitute amy.reckling for Scroll, and that will come directly to me. Or you can email this email address and say, I have a question for Amy, and the person who's monitoring that email inbox will forward that directly to me. If you have any questions about the online form, if you're having functionality issues or can't access it, this is the email address and phone number for our online services help desk. You can email me about those issues, but I will not be able to help you because I have nothing to do with our web platform or IT services.
Great. Thank you so much, Amy, for your time today. We're going to move on to the question period now before we wrap it up. So let's see. I'm going to jump right in with one that just popped in, actually.
Yeah.
So should color figures be absolutely avoided in your proposal?
I'm trying to think about whether color figures come through. I'm not certain. You can definitely include figures in your proposal. So I know for chemistry anyway, I can speak best to those proposals, but often people will have a scheme or a diagram. If they're proposing a mechanism to achieve a specific molecule, they'll show the reaction mechanism that they are proposing. So actually having visual help within the research proposal, like you can definitely do that. If you think that's going to help make it more clear for people who are reading it, then you can definitely have visual aid. I just cannot remember if you can submit in color. I'll make a note to follow up with you, Joe. Is that okay?
Yeah, that's fine. That's
okay.
Fine. And let me see. I'm going to make a little note here to make sure I forward that to them. Actually, you know what? I'll just maybe send that to the whole list. About color figures. Okay. Moving on. I'm going to get to some of the other questions we had coming earlier, and if you send in a question, I will get on get to you. So don't worry. Let me see here. Okay. Going kind of way back to the beginning of the session, you talked about the EDI form.
Yeah.
Yeah, we had one person comment that there was no option for them as a male to indicate that they're male, but there was 2 options for women, and they were wondering if that was a typo. I'm not sure if that.
I will definitely bring that back to the staff here.
Yeah, maybe check. I mean, in all likelihood, if that was an issue, it probably has already been corrected if there was a typo of that nature. But if you want to double check, that would be good.
Yeah, I will definitely double check on that. Thank you very much, whoever brought that forward.
Okay, and moving on to more of the application-specific questions regarding awards on the application. I'm assuming the location of tenure, that refers to the university where you received the award, correct? Not necessarily the country. The person asking that's got their PhD from a foreign university. So, okay.
Yes, yeah.
Great. The 2-page attachment for proposal, your proposal, that just to confirm that absolutely includes any references in the
Yeah. The 2-page includes references. For our doctoral program, it's a bit different. This year, the bibliography is a separate attachment, but for postdoctoral fellowships, the 2 pages includes both the research proposal and the accompanying citations.
Great. We had a question that was quite specific. It's about, really the gist of it is if somebody's in a specific area, but they can't find it in the codes for that area. So for example, I'll just read the question actually, and we can answer it more generally. My area is materials chemistry, but I couldn't find it in the chemistry subject code. Can I choose materials science, or should I, or should one of the other available chemistry subject codes, which would be appropriate there?
So I can tell you that we have materials chemists who are on the chemistry committee. Take a look at the membership online. I believe the materials science and technology right now would go to the biomedical and chemical engineering committee. which it could belong there. I'm sure they have materials people as well. So what I would suggest to you is to take a look at the memberships for those two committees and see which has the experts on it that you would rather have reading your application. In general for that, if you want your application to go to a specific committee, or if you're in chemistry and you don't see a code for materials chemistry, take that equivalent situation for one of the other selection committees. I would just select the most generic code and then specify further in the keywords.
Okay, I've got a few more questions here. We had a comment from one of the participants actually. And again, you'll follow up on this anyway, but the comment was that they don't think color is allowed. The reason is that they said in the transcript, for example, they know it has to be black and white. So
yeah, and that was actually my initial thought as well, but I couldn't find something, like I had no gut reaction that it absolutely wasn't allowed, so I just want to make sure I confirm that before saying absolutely no in case it is different for the research proposal attachment.
Sounds good. Let me see here. Okay. A bunch of questions actually related to sort of the specifics of how you can, whether or not you can hold multiple awards and be at two different institutions at the same time. So I'm going to just jump in on these all in a row. So can you hold a postdoc at more than one institution as part of a collaborative project? And this is in a specific situation here where one of the institutions is actually the institution where the person got their PhD. Or are you only allowed to hold an award at one institution?
Well, I can say for NSERC, it's typically you would have one primary affiliation for your postdoctoral fellowship. That's not to say that you can't collaborate with other researchers outside of that primary affiliation, but your supervisor and the primary institution where your award is being held, they cannot be the same as your PhD granting institution. You would never be able, like there is no situation where if you submitted an application to NSERC or tried to activate an award and had listed your previous supervisor as a supervisor for your PDF, you wouldn't be allowed to do that.
Okay. That actually answers another very similar question. Somebody asked if it was possible for your current supervisor to be the one you're proposing to work with, and you just clearly said absolutely.
No, that is one of our hard, fast rules. So even if you were to apply for an exception to ask to hold your postdoctoral fellowship at the institution where you received your PhD, if that exception was granted, you can never hold your postdoc with the same supervisor that you had for your PhD and have your NSERC funding. That is probably our only really hard, fast rule for this. Otherwise, I don't know if this was a question that might have come in, but what we are often asked is whether we have restrictions on the other sources of funding for our award holders. Mm-hmm. The answer to that, if anyone is curious, from NSERC's perspective, we don't really care how many different sources of funding or scholarships or fellowships that you have, but there are other programs. So often other programs might have a restriction that you wouldn't be able to hold an award with them and have NSERC funding simultaneously.
Yeah, we did have questions about that. I was going to ask them just now, so it was perfect timing. I think it's much more common for somebody because often the postdocs are required as part of their contract to actually apply for external funding. So if you get an NSERC award, the most common thing is your other funding will cut back to what we would call a top up. So they'll give you a little more money, or they'll give you less money, but they'll give you something on top of your NSERC award to kind of recognize that you did get both awards or whatever, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
That's very typical, I think, in the background. Although nowadays, caveat to that, some institutions, they won't do that because it might change your employee status with them. So but that's not up to NSERC. So that answers a couple of the questions that we had left. Yeah, and that applies even as Amy said, to other funding agencies as well. So for example, MyTax and that, they may have their own rules, and does not.
Yeah, and if you do run into any issues, so you're awarded your award and I don't know, if for some reason you're going to a foreign institution and they say that your NSERC's fellowship is valued too highly, or they have some issues with the level of funding or anything like that, you know, never assume that all is lost. In situations like that, you can always contact staff at NSERC, and if there's anything that we can do to assist in those situations, we'll let you know whether that's possible.
Great, that's very helpful. Oh, we had a clarification. So the person who asked the question about the current postdoc supervisor being the same as the potential supervisor, they meant your current postdoc supervisor. I think I actually might have misread that. Or something.
Oh yeah, that's totally fine.
It's not your PhD institution, it's somebody who's already doing a postdoc with someone.
Yeah.
And they apply with that and
That's no issues for us. So as long as it's not your PhD supervisor, you're in the clear. If you've already been 6 or 12 months within a current position and you're applying for funding to NSERC to continue on there with your postdoc supervisor that you currently have, who is different from your PhD supervisor, that's no red flags for us. That's totally in the clear.
There is a question here. Who can someone speak to directly about, if you have questions in general? You mentioned the skull at NSERC email address. Is that appropriate for questions about anything, including like the duration of timing between when you finish your PhD and when you start your award?
Yep, absolutely. Any questions pertaining to the program at all, you can direct them to that email inbox. So I can give an overview of what happens there. So we have program assistants who monitor that email inbox, and as soon as they get a request, if they aren't able to answer it directly themselves, they'll forward it to one of the program officers who works within the scholarships and fellowships division. So I get these emails. They're sort of spread out around all the different staff, and then we will contact you and help to answer your question. And you can also continue contacting that program officer going forward, or send another question to the Scholar inbox.
Okay, let me see here. We actually have a question. This person has a highly technical research proposal, and they say that they're not really sure how to work any kind of EDI into that. Is there any advice you could have on that, or elaborating on the need for it?
Yeah, so it's not a specific selection criterion. We ask people to take it into account as they're crafting their proposal, but you know, not all NSE proposals will have, it will not be relevant to all of them. So I apologize, my background is chemistry, but if I'm proposing a new reaction pathway for a molecule, that's not going to have equity, diversity, and inclusion considerations that are relevant to that research. It doesn't fit in there. So if you have a very technical proposal and you've asked that question and the answer is this isn't relevant, then that's totally fine.
Great. Another question. Is it possible to include a web address with additional information in any of the freeform attachments? You mentioned that you can't just plop a web address there as what you're putting in, but is it possible to include that, or is that?
You can include it, but people who are reviewing the application are instructed not to follow links that are included. So while you would be free to include that web address, you would just be using up space in your freeform section that won't lead anyone anywhere, because they're not, reviewers are not allowed to follow external links.
Okay. We're getting down to the last few here, I think, but keep them coming if you have any more questions, folks. We have time. A little bit. Wow, this is gone. I'm liking the questions, I have to say. Yeah, it's been great. So quick question. Oh, I believe we already covered this. The CCV is not required for the NSERC application, correct?
No CCV. For PDF, you'll have one account, log into the online system, and that's where all the information that you require for the application is uploaded. So no additional CCV. You don't have to link to an external account for anything like that.
We've got a question here that says, should I include a consent letter from the host? I'm not sure what that's referring to. Maybe you can understand.
That might be a consent letter saying that the host institution would be willing to have them at the university where they're proposing to go.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And an additional attachment like that wouldn't be allowed, so we don't accept any I'll note here as well, once you have submitted your application, we don't accept any updates, and if you're missing a portion of the application, you can't submit portions by email, even for the free form sections. It all has to be through the online system. A letter like that, I can't see where that would be, like you can't attach that to the application, but what you can say in your justification for location of tenure is that I have reached out to this institution and they have agreed to host me. Maybe sometimes it depends on whether they're successful in receiving external funding to help with their salary, but yeah, you can include it in your justification for location of tenure if you have been contacted and accepted at a host institution.
Great. Okay, we got one question left, which worked really well for our timing. I am a postdoc for almost 2 years now, but I've worked really closely with another collaborator in my PhD, same department, same university, who have known me longer professionally and personally than my current postdoc supervisor. I chose to ask her and PhD supervisor as my two referees, is this going to be a red flag? Is the concern the person has?
Oh, that's tough. If you've already been working with them for 2 years, then that wouldn't be a red flag to me, because there's somebody who would know you and your research very well. If you're leaving out another reference that you think that the selection committee would expect you to have as a result, then I would just put a small note in your special circumstances or in the applicant statement saying, the special circumstances would be more appropriate for this actually, just saying I didn't invite this person and this is why, just to address any potential questions that might come to mind for the people who are reviewing the application. But no, I don't see any disadvantage to having somebody who you've been working closely with for 2 years provide one of your reference letters.
Well, I think that the only thing I would add to that is where I think this comes up most often is if somebody has for whatever reason, has a falling out with their former supervisor, right? Then yeah, you really need to provide a bit of an explanation for that, because that's definitely a red flag.
Yeah.
We had a question here, a quick one. Is it possible to include more than 2 reference letters?
Oh, no, I'm sorry. You have to select 2. That's one of the difficulties of the process, but it's really, as long as they know you very well, then they'll be appropriate. Again, if for some reason you think that you're leaving out, so it always depends on your situation, where you are currently in your career, but if most appropriate for you right now is to have someone who's not your PhD thesis supervisor provide a reference for whatever reason, then just make sure that you detail that reason in your special circumstances, because you don't want to unjustly raise a red flag that might not need to be raised.
Got it. We're going to ask one final question here, and then we're going to call it a day. And if anybody has any follow-up questions, they're welcome to email you.
Oh yeah, of course.
There we go. So we have a question that's, this person has been working for about a year as a postdoc. Is it better to get a reference from my current PI that they've been working with for a year, or a previous PhD collaborator if they worked together long and had a publication?
Those sound like exactly the 2 references that I would invite to provide my 2 reports on the applicant.
Yeah, so you would go with I think if you go with your current supervisor as a postdoc, that trumps your PhD supervisor as long as you've been with them for long enough, right?
Well, you have to, it depends on the stage of your career, how long you've been with your postdoctoral supervisor, right? If you've been with them only for a couple of months, then I wouldn't say that I would invite them over your PhD supervisor. But if you've been working with them now for close to a year, and I would invite them as one of your references, and probably your PhD supervisor as your second reference. But
it wouldn't be any kind of red flag on against your current postdoc supervisor. I think that then if you don't invite your PhD supervisor, but you have someone else you've worked with in this situation for this person's question, I think that's fine, right? It would only be a red flag if the current supervisor or your most recent one was missing.
Yeah, exactly. So the reason that regulation is listed the way it is on our website is that sometimes people will have made contact with a potential supervisor and then despite that person not really having actually worked with them or knowing much about the applicant, they will ask their proposed supervisor, who they've never worked with and who barely knows them, and they're not actually working in their lab yet, to write a reference letter for them. And so that would be, that would really work against you in the evaluation of your application, because it's obvious to the selection committee that if you have your proposed supervisor writing a reference and you're not currently working with them, then that's not something that you're supposed to do. I don't know if that is if that came across clearly. It's just, if you have your proposed supervisor is providing you with a reference, then you should currently be working with them, or they should know you in a significant capacity as a researcher already. If you've only just met them and you're proposing to work in their lab and they don't know you well, then don't ask them to be a reference, because we require that you ask somebody that actually has supervised you or knows your work well.
Yeah. And so if you aren't, do you feel like you need to put anything in the special circumstances to explain if you're not including your current supervisor, or is it just a given if you've only been with them for like 6 months that you're not going to ask them for a reference letter yet?
I don't think that it would harm anybody's application to note that, just to be sure. It, again, doesn't have to be a very long explanation, but you could include a very simple one sentence in the special circumstances saying, please note that I have not included my current research supervisor because at this point I've only been working with them for a month, and I don't think that, and as per NSERC regulations, I don't think that they would be able to properly speak to my skills and abilities at this point.
Great. All right. With that, I'm going to say once again a big thank you to Amy Reckling for joining us today from NSERC and providing what I think was a fantastic webinar and answering some questions in a really helpful and very informative fashion. So thank you to Amy. Thank you to everybody who attended today. And yeah, all the questions, I thought that was fantastic. I hope you all found it very informative. And we will send out a copy of the slides. Amy has kindly provided already, so I'll send that out sometime in the next day or so. So you'll all have copies of that as well. That's about it. Amy, do you have any final words?
Thank you all for attending. And again, I know we've mentioned this, but feel free to get in touch with me if you have any follow-up questions or with any staff at NSERC. Ultimately, we're really here to answer these questions. It's our job, so never hesitate. Even if you think it is a very unimportant or stupid question to ask, it never is. Don't hesitate to contact us.
That's great. I have taken the liberty of adding a couple of links to the chat window. If people are interested, these are links to our webinar that we have on tomorrow and the one we have on Friday. There's still some room in both those webinars. The first one there is CAPS 101 if you want to learn more about what CAPS has to offer for resources in that. And the second is a repeat of the first webinar we did this week in honor of Paula. It's called Preparing for a Career After Your Postdoc, and it's with a doc talent management is presenting that for us. So the first one went really well. I recommend coming for the second one if you are interested at all. Thanks again to Amy Reckling. Amy, I'm sure we'll be in touch again shortly. And you'll know about the color question if there's any clarification on that.
Yeah, I should have an answer on that pretty quickly. I just want to make sure I'm giving the correct response before making that statement.
Fantastic. All right, thanks again. Have a good day, guys.